"It's too big," she whispered. The rancher was shocked by the mail-order bride's request. Ethan Cole had spent most of his life on the ranch. From the time he could remember, this land had been his world. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with fences, barns, and pastures that carried the smell of hay and earth. He knew every corner, every tree, every path where the cattle liked to wander. The ranch was more than just a property. It was a legacy passed down from his father and grandfather, a place that demanded constant care. And yet, despite its beauty and the pride he felt in maintaining it, it often felt lonely. Ethan was not an unkind man. He was strong, patient, and steady, with hands roughened by years of work. Yet his life had been marked by isolation. The nearest town was miles away, and he rarely went beyond it except for supplies or occasional errands. Friends came and went, some married and moved to cities, others seeking different lives. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to speaking to himself more than to anyone else. The silence was both comforting and heavy, and some nights he found it unbearable. He had thought about marriage before, but the timing had never been right. There had been women who visited the ranch in passing, curious about rural life, or distant relatives who hinted at interest. But the work was demanding, and Ethan always felt a pull toward solitude. He liked the routine, the predictability, and the quiet companionship of the land. And yet, there was an emptiness he could not ignore. He longed for someone to share the simple moments, a meal, a laugh, or a conversation at the end of a long day. It was during one of those quiet evenings, with the sun dipping low behind the hills and casting golden light across the fields, that Ethan received a letter that would change everything. It was unusual because he rarely received letters that were personal, and certainly not ones that promised a new life. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he wanted to disturb the calm he had grown used to. But curiosity and perhaps something deeper urged him to see what it contained. The letter came from a woman named Clara Hayes. She was from a small town far away, one that Ethan had never visited. The words were simple and honest, a mixture of hope and nervousness. She wrote about her life, her family, and her desire to try something new, something that would challenge her in ways she had never imagined. There was an openness to her words that caught Ethan off guard. He read them again and again, noting the sincerity and quiet strength in her tone. Ethan had considered the idea of a mail-order marriage before. It was a practical solution for many men like him, men who lived in remote places and needed companionship and help with their daily lives. It was not about romance, at least not at first. It was about building a life with someone who understood the demands and rhythms of the ranch. And yet, as he read Clara's letter, he realized that this arrangement could be more than just practicality. There was a spark of connection, even through words on paper, and it was enough to make his heart beat a little faster. Weeks later, the day arrived when Clara was to arrive at the ranch. Ethan had cleaned the house as best as he could, dusting surfaces that had not seen much attention and preparing a modest meal. He stood on the porch, watching the horizon, imagining the figure of a young woman approaching along the dusty path. There was a mixture of anticipation and anxiety in him. Meeting someone for the first time under such circumstances was strange, even for a man used to life on his own. When Clara finally appeared, she looked exactly as she had described in her letter, small, with careful eyes that seemed to take everything in at once. She carried only a few bags, but there was a sense of determination in the way she walked. The sun caught her hair, and for a moment Ethan forgot the size of the ranch, the work that awaited him, and the responsibilities he carried. He simply watched her as she drew closer, and he felt something he had not felt in years, anticipation not for work, but for companionship. Clara, for her part, was overwhelmed the moment she stepped onto the property. She had imagined open spaces before, but nothing compared to the vastness of Ethan's ranch. The land seemed endless, rolling hills stretching into the distance with no sign of another home, road, or neighbor. She could hear the low hum of cattle in the distance, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the faint clatter of tools in the barn. The silence was different from what she was used to. It was heavy and full at the same time. It's too big," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The words barely carried over the breeze, but Ethan, who had been guiding her toward the house, stopped and turned. There was a pause as he looked at her, sensing the weight behind her quiet statement. She did not speak of the physical land alone. Her words reflected the enormity of the life she had chosen, the responsibilities she would have to shoulder, and the sudden plunge into a world entirely unfamiliar to her. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He had known the ranch could be overwhelming, even for someone who had grown up around it. He had underestimated how it would appear to Clara, someone from a small town where life moved at a slower pace and the stakes were smaller. Yet there was a resolve in her eyes, a determination not to run despite the fear, and that, more than anything, struck him. This woman was brave enough to step into a life she had never known, and that courage demanded respect. The first night was quiet. Clara explored the house, taking in each room with a mix of awe and trepidation. She could hear the wind outside, sweeping through the open fields, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. Ethan watched her from the kitchen doorway, cleaning up the dinner dishes. He noticed the way she lingered near the window, staring out at the darkness beyond the porch light. There was a longing there, a wish for reassurance that everything would be okay. Ethan understood that feeling more than she knew. Over the next few days, Clara struggled to find her footing. She had grown up in a small town where neighbors were close and chores were light. Here, the work was relentless, and every task seemed larger than life. Feeding the animals, cleaning the barns, tending to the fields, it was exhausting. And yet she did not complain. She asked questions, listened carefully, and tried to remember every detail Ethan showed her. It was clear she wanted to succeed, to prove that she could belong here, even if the land itself seemed too big, too wide, too demanding. Ethan, too, was learning. He realized that he had expected her to adjust instantly, to take to ranch life as easily as he had. But he was forgetting what it was like to start fresh, to face something entirely new. Patience, he realized, would be the key, not just for her but for him as well. He began to slow down, to explain tasks in smaller steps, and to offer encouragement rather than criticism. For the first time in years, he saw the value of sharing his life instead of managing it alone. Evenings became moments of quiet connection. After a long day, they would sit on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of orange and gold. They did not talk much at first, but the silence was comfortable. Slowly, they began to share stories. Ethan spoke of the ranch's history, of his family, and of the challenges he had faced alone. Clara shared memories of her childhood, her dreams, and the small-town life she had left behind. With each story, the distance between them shrank, and the ranch, though still enormous, felt less intimidating. The whisper of "it's too big" stayed with Ethan. He understood that it was more than a remark. It was a plea, a reminder that life could overwhelm even the strongest of hearts. And he vowed silently that he would not let her face it alone. The ranch was big, the work was hard, and the responsibilities were immense, but together they could face it. The land that had once been a symbol of solitude now held the promise of companionship, of shared struggle, and of a life that neither of them had dared to imagine before. As the days turned into weeks, Clara began to navigate the ranch more confidently. She still stumbled, still felt the weight of the tasks, but she laughed more often, shared her thoughts, and allowed herself to belong. Ethan noticed the subtle changes, the way she carried herself with a little more certainty, and it gave him hope. The ranch, once a place of endless labor and solitude, was slowly becoming a home, not just for him, but for both of them. And so the story of their lives on the ranch began, not with grandeur, but with small steps, quiet understanding, and a shared willingness to face what seemed too big. It was the beginning of a partnership forged not by convenience alone, but by courage, patience, and the unspoken promise that neither would have to walk alone. The morning after Clara's first week on the ranch, Ethan noticed something different in her demeanor. She moved with a bit more confidence, though her eyes still held the flicker of uncertainty. The vastness of the land had not shrunk, and the responsibilities of the ranch had not eased, yet she seemed determined to face them head-on. Ethan felt a quiet admiration for her. It was not just bravery. It was a willingness to grow, to learn, and to take on a life far removed from the familiar streets and cozy corners of her hometown. That morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Clara approached Ethan with a request that caught him completely off guard. She stood at the edge of the barnyard, clutching her apron, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Ethan, I need time," she said softly, almost a whisper but firm in its meaning. "I can't do everything right away. I need space to learn, to understand, to feel like I belong." Ethan paused, leaning against the wooden fence, his hands rough and worn from the morning chores. He had expected many things when he agreed to a mail-order marriage. He had expected curiosity, maybe hesitation, but he had not expected such honesty, such clarity. For a moment, he was speechless. The ranch, the land, the work, they were overwhelming even for him. And here was Clara, admitting openly that she felt the same. He had imagined that she would adapt quickly, that she would throw herself into chores with energy and gratitude. Instead, she asked for patience. And though it was simple, it required a shift in perspective he had not considered. He realized that she was not asking for privileges or comfort, she was asking for understanding. And in that request, Ethan saw a truth he had overlooked. The life he led was not just hard, it was demanding, and it required compassion to navigate it together. "I understand," Ethan said finally, his voice low but steady. "This isn't easy. The ranch, it's big, it's demanding, and it can overwhelm anyone. I know that now. We'll take it one step at a time." Clara's eyes softened, a faint smile appearing as relief washed over her face. It was the first time Ethan saw the weight lift from her shoulders, even slightly. She had voiced a truth, and in doing so, created a space for both of them to breathe. The days that followed were a delicate dance of learning and adjustment. Ethan began to slow down, to explain tasks in detail, to allow Clara to try on her own while offering guidance rather than correction. She stumbled often, tripped over fence posts, spilled feed, misjudged the weight of buckets. But each mistake became a lesson rather than a failure. And with every lesson, Clara's confidence grew. She learned to read the behavior of the animals, to sense the weather through the wind and clouds, and to anticipate the daily needs of the ranch. Evenings were filled with shared effort and quiet reflection. After long days, they would sit on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun set over the wide-open fields. The sky transformed into a canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples, and the silence of the ranch felt alive in a way neither had expected. Sometimes they spoke of the past, Clara of her small-town childhood, Ethan of his solitary life on the ranch. Sometimes they spoke of the future, though cautiously, unsure of what it might hold. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, the sound of the wind through the trees carrying comfort rather than loneliness. One afternoon, as they worked side by side mending a fence, Clara paused and looked around. Her hands were scratched and dirty, her clothes stained with hay and mud, yet she smiled, a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "I never thought I could do this," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, realizing that the strength he had admired was not just determination, it was perseverance. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and physical challenge, and yet she had continued. Ethan felt a quiet swell of respect. This was not the easy companionship he had once imagined. This was something deeper, partnership forged through effort, understanding, and shared struggle. He realized that his expectations had been limited to convenience, while Clara's had been about growth and integrity. And in that realization, he felt a shift within himself. He wanted to be more than just a provider. He wanted to be a partner, a teacher, and someone who could share in both the triumphs and trials of life on the ranch. As weeks turned into a month, Clara's transformation became evident. She had begun to anticipate tasks without instruction, her hands steady and confident. She moved through the ranch with a sense of purpose that brought Ethan a quiet pride. Yet there were moments when doubt crept back, nights when she would stand at the window, staring at the moonlit fields and whisper quietly, "It's still so big." Ethan would hear her and step beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It will always be big," he would say, "but it's easier when we face it together." Their relationship deepened through these small interactions. It was not romantic in the way novels described love at first sight, but it was intimate, grounded in mutual respect and honesty. Ethan began to share more than he had ever intended, revealing memories of his father, stories of the ranch's history, and the quiet loneliness that had marked his life. Clara, in turn, shared her own fears and hopes, her voice carrying both vulnerability and courage. The ranch, which had once symbolized isolation, now became a stage for learning about each other. Each day brought new challenges: a cow giving birth unexpectedly, a sudden storm that threatened the barns, or a stubborn gate that refused to close. Through it all, Clara asked questions, made suggestions, and even laughed when things went wrong. Ethan realized that the ranch had not changed. The tasks were the same, the land was the same, but the experience of it had transformed because it was shared. One rainy evening, as they tended to the animals huddled in the barn, Clara turned to Ethan with a thoughtful look. "I know I asked for time," she said, "but I want you to know I'm learning." "Slowly, yes, but I'm trying." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the barn. Her honesty, her willingness to face difficulty, and her persistence were more than enough. "And I see that," he replied. "Every day I see it." Over time, Ethan began to notice changes in himself as well. He had spent years guarding his emotions, believing that strength meant silence and self-reliance. But now, with Clara beside him, he learned that strength could also mean patience, empathy, and trust. He found himself laughing more easily, feeling lighter after sharing stories, and even enjoying the chaos of life on the ranch instead of merely enduring it. Clara's presence had brought a new dimension to his life, one that was not measured in work completed or animals tended, but in connection and shared purpose. One evening, as they watched the stars appear one by one across the vast sky, Clara whispered again, almost to herself, "It's still too big." But this time, there was no fear in her voice, only acknowledgement. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on hers. "It's big," he said, "but now we face it together. It doesn't have to feel too much when we do." And in that moment, both understood that the ranch, the life, and the challenges were not obstacles to fear. They were opportunities to grow together. The first month had been filled with small victories. Fences repaired, cattle fed, barns cleaned, and chores done on time. But more importantly, it had been filled with understanding, compromise, and the slow building of trust. Clara had not yet mastered everything about ranch life, but she had mastered the most important thing, learning to rely on herself and on Ethan without losing her own voice. And Ethan had learned to let go of rigid expectations, to see the beauty in partnership, and to recognize that life on the ranch could be shared without losing strength or pride. By the end of part 2, it was clear that this was more than an arrangement. It was the beginning of a life built on honesty, patience, and respect. The ranch, immense and demanding as ever, was no longer a symbol of isolation or fear. It was a place of possibility, a place where two people could face life together, step by step, learning, growing, and supporting each other through every challenge. And though the land stretched endlessly into the horizon, and the work was never done, both Ethan and Clara understood something vital. What seemed too big alone could feel manageable, even comforting, when shared with someone willing to walk beside you. Life on the ranch continued to challenge both Ethan and Clara. By now, a few months had passed since she had arrived, and the initial overwhelm had begun to transform into a steady rhythm. Yet, every day still brought its own tests. The land was vast and unpredictable. The weather could change in an instant, cattle could become restless, and the equipment could fail at the most inconvenient moments. Clara had learned many practical skills, but she also discovered that the ranch required something beyond knowledge and effort. It required patience, resilience, and the willingness to face mistakes without letting them define her. One early morning, Clara and Ethan walked through the pasture to check on the cattle. Mist hung low over the fields and dew glistened on the grass, giving the landscape a magical, almost ethereal quality. Clara felt a mixture of awe and anxiety. Even though she had grown accustomed to the wide-open spaces, each visit to the pasture reminded her of how vast and demanding the ranch really was. As they approached a small herd, Clara noticed one of the cows limping slightly. She knelt beside it, examining its leg carefully. "It looks like it might be injured," she said softly, worry in her voice. Ethan came closer, observing her actions. "It's probably just a minor sprain," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll have to keep an eye on her, maybe separate her from the herd for a few days." Clara nodded, grateful for his guidance. She realized that facing challenges like this was part of learning, not just about ranch life, but about problem-solving and decision-making. Each small task, from tending to animals to mending fences, carried lessons in responsibility, foresight, and care. As days passed, Clara's confidence continued to grow. She could now handle many chores independently, though she still turned to Ethan when unsure. He noticed subtle changes, the way she carried herself with steadiness, the way she approached problems thoughtfully, and the occasional glimmer of pride when a task was completed successfully. For Ethan, these moments were profound. He had not expected a mail-order marriage to bring such depth, such learning, and such growth. He began to feel that perhaps this partnership could evolve into something far richer than he had ever imagined. Yet, life on the ranch was not always easy. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and strong winds began to whip across the fields. The cattle became restless, and the sound of thunder echoed through the valleys. Clara felt a twinge of fear, recalling the first week she had spent struggling to understand the ranch. The enormity of the land, combined with the raw power of nature, reminded her that the work was never predictable. Ethan noticed her unease. "It's okay," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've handled storms before. Together, we can handle this one too." They moved quickly, securing gates, bringing animals into shelter, and making sure the barns were strong against the wind. Clara followed Ethan's instructions carefully, learning how to act decisively under pressure. By the time the storm passed, the sky had cleared, leaving the air crisp and fresh, with puddles reflecting the brilliant blue above. Clara looked around, exhausted but triumphant. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and chaos, and had prevailed. It was during these moments that the bond between them strengthened. Work on the ranch demanded cooperation, and cooperation required trust. Ethan trusted Clara to follow through on tasks, to act responsibly, and to learn from mistakes. Clara trusted Ethan to guide her, to protect the animals, and to share the burden of the land. Trust, they realized, was not built in words alone but in shared experiences, in facing difficulties together and emerging stronger on the other side. One evening, after a particularly long day repairing a broken fence, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch, their bodies sore and tired. They drank cold water from tin cups and watched as the sun sank behind the distant hills. Clara broke the comfortable silence. "I never knew it would be this hard," she admitted, her voice quiet but earnest. "Not just the work, but the responsibility. The ranch, it feels alive, like it's asking more from me than I thought I could give." Ethan nodded, understanding completely. "It is hard," he said, "but that's what makes it worthwhile. Every task, every challenge, it teaches us something, and we're learning together. You're not alone in this." Clara smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It was one thing to say she could handle ranch life, but quite another to feel supported and understood. That evening, the stars came out in abundance, painting the sky with a million points of light. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of belonging, not just on the ranch but beside Ethan. As time passed, challenges continued to arise. There were animals that fell ill, fences that broke unexpectedly, and machinery that failed at critical moments. Each problem demanded quick thinking, cooperation, and patience. Clara's skills grew with every obstacle, but so did her understanding of life on the ranch. She realized that success was not about perfection, but about persistence. Mistakes were inevitable, but facing them with determination and learning from them was what mattered most. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Clara noticed that some of the crops were wilting. She had planted them herself, following Ethan's instructions, and felt a pang of disappointment. "I think I did something wrong," she said, frowning at the drooping plants. Ethan came over, examining the garden. "It's not your fault," he said gently. "Sometimes weather or soil conditions affect plants. The important thing is that you tried, and next time we'll adjust together." Clara nodded, realizing that growth, both in life and on the ranch, required patience and the willingness to keep trying despite setbacks. There were also moments of quiet joy. Early mornings with mist over the fields, the sound of birdsong, the sight of calves taking their first wobbly steps. These moments reminded Clara why she had come to the ranch in the first place. She began to notice small details she had missed before. The way sunlight filtered through the trees, the scent of fresh hay, the gentle rhythm of the animals moving across the pastures. Life on the ranch was demanding, yes, but it was also beautiful, filled with lessons that could not be found anywhere else. Ethan, too, was changed by Clara's presence. He had spent years in solitude, believing that strength meant independence. But with Clara, he learned that strength could also be shared. He began to see the value of partnership, the importance of patience, and the power of empathy. He laughed more freely, listened more carefully, and allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways he had not before. The ranch was still challenging, still vast, but it no longer felt like a burden. It had become a place where life could be shared, where growth and learning were constant, and where two people could navigate hardships together. By the middle of the season, Clara had become adept at most of the ranch tasks. She could feed the animals, mend fences, tend to the garden, and manage daily routines with confidence. Yet, she never lost her humility or curiosity. She continued to ask questions, to seek guidance, and to embrace every opportunity to learn. Ethan watched her with a mixture of pride and admiration. She was no longer the woman who had whispered, "It's too big." She was someone who faced challenges, learned from mistakes, and grew stronger every day. Their partnership was not without tension. There were moments of disagreement, small arguments over priorities, or frustration when things went wrong. But even in these moments, there was a growing understanding. Clara learned to communicate her feelings clearly and honestly, while Ethan learned to listen without judgment. The ranch demanded teamwork, and the two of them discovered that communication, patience, and compromise were as important as any practical skill. One crisp evening, as they watched the sunset together, Clara turned to Ethan. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "The ranch isn't just about work. It's about life, about patience, about learning about us." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. They had both grown, both learned, and both realized that life on the ranch was not meant to be faced alone. It was demanding, yes, but it was also rewarding, filled with lessons that extended beyond fences, fields, and animals. The end of Part 3 marked a turning point. Clara had become confident, capable, and resilient, yet still humble and willing to learn. Ethan had learned patience, partnership, and the joy of shared struggle. Together, they had faced challenges that could have overwhelmed either of them alone, but instead strengthened the bond between them. The ranch remained vast and demanding, yet it was no longer intimidating. It was a shared space, a place where growth, understanding, and connection could flourish. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills on another evening, the two of them sat on the porch, looking out over the fields. The ranch still stretched endlessly into the distance, but now it felt manageable, almost comforting. Life had not become easier, but it had become shared. And in that sharing, Ethan and Clara discovered a profound truth. Challenges, no matter how big, were easier to face when met together, with patience, trust, and understanding. The seasons were changing again on the ranch. Autumn had arrived, painting the fields with shades of gold, red, and brown. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry leaves and fertile soil. For Ethan and Clara, life had settled into a rhythm, one that was challenging, rewarding, and deeply shared. The ranch, which had once seemed endless and intimidating, now felt like a place of opportunity, growth, and quiet happiness. Clara had grown stronger, both in skill and in spirit. She moved across the land with confidence, tending to the animals, fixing fences, and managing daily chores without hesitation. Yet she had not lost her humility. She still sought guidance when unsure, asked questions, and approached every task with care. She had learned that life on the ranch required more than strength. It demanded patience, understanding, and a willingness to learn from mistakes, and she had embraced every lesson. Ethan noticed the change in her every day. He remembered the first week she had arrived when she had whispered, "It's too big." Now she stood tall and capable, her hands strong from work, her eyes reflecting determination and resilience. Yet there was still a softness in her presence, a kindness and thoughtfulness that reminded him of the importance of empathy and patience. Together, they had built a partnership that was rooted in trust, respect, and shared effort. One morning, as they prepared to move a herd of cattle to a different pasture, Clara paused and looked around. "I never thought I would feel at home here," she said quietly, her voice carrying both awe and gratitude. "But now it feels like this place belongs to both of us." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had not expected a mail-order marriage to bring such fulfillment, such shared joy. It was not just about the land, or the work, or even the companionship. It was about building a life together, learning, growing, and supporting each other along the way. The tasks of the day were many. Cattle had to be guided carefully, gates had to be opened and closed in the correct order, and the fences that had been weakened by the previous storm needed attention. Clara worked alongside Ethan, moving with purpose, listening to his instructions, and applying everything she had learned. Yet she also made suggestions, noticed details, and occasionally corrected small mistakes Ethan had overlooked. Their partnership was no longer one of teacher and learner. It had become mutual, built on trust and respect for each other's abilities. During lunch, they sat under a large oak tree, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled light on the grass around them. Clara laughed at a small joke Ethan made, and for a moment the past, the fear, the uncertainty, the struggle, felt very distant. They were no longer strangers navigating the overwhelming demands of ranch life. They were companions, equals, partners in every sense of the word. As the weeks went by, the ranch presented new challenges. One afternoon, a calf wandered too far and got stuck in a shallow ditch. Clara noticed immediately and ran to help. Ethan followed, guiding her with calm instructions. Together, they carefully lifted the calf, checking for injuries and ensuring it returned safely to the herd. Clara's hands were muddy, her clothes torn slightly, but she smiled, feeling the satisfaction of having acted decisively. Ethan watched her, pride swelling in his chest. These small victories were more meaningful than any grand success. They represented growth, courage, and the strength of their partnership. Evenings were moments of reflection and connection. After long days, they would sit on the porch, sipping tea or warm cider, and watch as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sharing memories of childhood, family, and the choices that had brought them here. Sometimes they spoke of the future, imagining what life could look like in the years to come. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, letting the beauty and vastness of the land remind them that life was not just about work. It was about presence, understanding, and shared experience. One evening, as the first frost appeared on the fields, Clara turned to Ethan. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't met?" she asked softly. Ethan considered the question, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but I don't want to imagine it. Because what we have now, it's real, and it's worth every struggle, every mistake, every challenge." Clara smiled, feeling the weight of his words. It was not a grand romantic declaration, but it was honesty, trust, and a promise of shared life. The next morning brought another challenge. The barn roof, weakened by time and weather, showed signs of imminent collapse. Clara immediately recognized the danger and informed Ethan. Together, they worked to secure the structure, gather tools, and make repairs. The task was exhausting, requiring precision, strength, and cooperation. But by the end of the day, the barn was stable, safe, and ready to protect the animals. Clara's awareness, quick thinking, and initiative impressed Ethan deeply. She had grown from someone overwhelmed by the size of the ranch into someone who could face its dangers with courage and intelligence. Through these shared experiences, their bond deepened. They no longer saw the ranch as something to endure. It was a living, breathing entity that demanded attention, care, and respect. They faced each challenge together, learning not only about the land and the animals but about each other. Their conversations became richer, filled with humor, insight, and shared memories. They learned to anticipate each other's actions, to support each other without hesitation, and to find joy in the simple victories of daily life. One crisp morning, Clara suggested planting a small orchard near the farmhouse. Ethan was surprised at first, but he listened as she explained her vision: rows of apple, pear, and peach trees that would provide food, beauty, and a sense of permanence. Together they prepared the land, dug the holes, and planted the saplings with care. Clara's idea was more than practical, it was symbolic. It represented growth, investment in the future, and the creation of something lasting. Ethan realized that life on the ranch was not just about survival. It was about building, nurturing, and dreaming together. As autumn turned to winter, the work became even more demanding. Snow covered the fields, making travel difficult and adding weight to the roofs of barns and sheds. Clara and Ethan worked tirelessly, clearing paths, feeding animals, and ensuring that the ranch remained functional despite the harsh weather. The cold was biting, the days were long, and mistakes could be costly. Yet, each task completed brought a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that effort and perseverance were rewarded in tangible ways. Clara often paused to take in the beauty of the winter landscape. The snow-capped hills, the frost-covered trees, and the quiet stillness of the land gave her a sense of peace. Despite the challenges, she had grown to love this life: the rhythm, the responsibility, the connection to the land and to Ethan. She had learned that fulfillment came not from ease or comfort but from dedication, patience, and shared effort. And she had discovered that the ranch, which had once seemed impossibly vast, now felt like a home, a place of belonging and purpose. Ethan, too, reflected on how much had changed. He had learned to let go of rigid expectations, to trust in Clara's abilities, and to embrace the joy of partnership. Life was still demanding, the ranch still immense, but he no longer carried the weight alone. The challenges they faced together had created a bond stronger than either could have imagined. He realized that true strength came not from solitude but from shared responsibility, empathy, and understanding. One evening, as snow began to fall gently over the fields, Clara turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever feel like we've conquered the ranch?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. Ethan laughed softly. "No," he admitted. "The ranch is always changing, always demanding. But I think we've learned something more important than conquering it. We've learned to face it together." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. It was not about mastering the land. It was about mastering themselves, their partnership, and the life they were building together. By the time the first year of Clara's life on the ranch drew to a close, the transformation was clear. She had grown confident, capable, and resilient. Ethan had learned patience, empathy, and the joy of shared effort. Together, they had turned the challenges of the ranch into opportunities for growth, understanding, and connection. The land, which had once seemed overwhelming, now symbolized possibility, hope, and the rewards of partnership. As they stood on the porch one evening, looking out over the fields blanketed in snow, Clara whispered, almost to herself, "It's still big, but I think we can handle it." Ethan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Together," he said. And in that simple word, they captured everything they had learned. That life, no matter how vast or demanding, could be faced with courage, patience, and shared effort. The ranch, immense and powerful, had become a home, not just of walls and fences, but of understanding, trust, and partnership. And for Ethan and Clara, that was more than enough. It was the life they had chosen, the life they had built, and the life they would continue to nurture together, one day at a time.